Spider-Man is my favourite superhero. I know that's basically the equivalent of me saying that my favourite car has wheels, but it's just the truth. And Spider-Man fans are eating good this year, with Across the Spider-Verse coming out this month and the sequel to Insomniac's Spider-Man on PS4 coming later in the year. With the huge Spider-Man crossover movie right around the corner, I got the itch to play the game that inspired the original comic book storyline that led to the movies, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. I still remember buying my first Xbox 360 and grabbing a copy of this and Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary straight off the shelf. I spent hundreds of hours playing Shattered Dimensions instead of going outside, making friends and talking to girls.
Hey.
So I wanted to take another look at the game that pretty much consumed my entire childhood to see if it still holds up today. Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions was released in September 2010 for the PS3, Xbox 360, Wii and DS, with the Microsoft Windows version coming in November 2010. Beanox was the primary developer for the home console and PC versions, with assistance from CRI middleware regarding the combat system, but the DS game was handled by a different developer entirely, Kryptonite Games. The game was received well by fans and critics alike upon release, with large publications praising the game's personality, fun gameplay, and the inclusion of 4 different Spider-Men.
Dude, pants! No one wants to see your junk.
Keep laughing, punk!
Have you ever forgotten to renew your licensing deal with Marvel Comics to publish video games based on their characters? Me too. And we're not alone, as Activision also did this. They forgot to renew their license in 2014, so Shattered Dimensions was removed from the PlayStation and Xbox digital stores. But luckily the game was re-released on Steam in 2015, and unluckily it was delisted again in 2017. Because of this, the only legitimate way to play the game today is to buy a second-hand copy, and while the prices aren't exactly terrible, the resellers definitely know what they're doing. If they see Spider-Man pasted on the front of the game, you know they're jacking the price up. The original story for the game was written by Spider-Man veteran Dan Slott. Slott had a lot of experience writing for the Wallcrawler, having worked on notable runs like the Superior and Amazing Spider-Man series, and in 2014, Slott went on to write the original Spider-Verse event that inspired the 2018 movie. While Shattered Dimensions isn't the original crossover event, I'm pretty sure an episode from the 90s animated series gets that, the game definitely had a significant influence on the events that led up to the creation of the movie. The game's story begins with Spider-Man attempting to stop Mysterio from stealing the Tablet of Order and Chaos, and during the ensuing battle, Spider-Man shatters the tablet and the fragments are dispersed across the multiverse. In order to prevent the weakened fabric of reality from being destroyed, Madam Web recruits 3 additional Spider-Men to track down the tablet and restore balance before it's too late. The story setup is pretty basic, but it doesn't need to be anything spectacular. All it needs to do is present a reason for the Spider-Men to come together and give the player a goal to achieve, and it does this pretty well. Moving on from the story setup, let's talk about the game itself. The game is split across 3 acts, and these acts contain a level set in each of the 4 dimensions, alongside a final confrontation at the very end of the game. After completing the tutorial, you're free to take on each act in whichever order you want, but you need to fully complete an act before moving on to the next one. Each level has you following a tablet fragment which has been picked up by a villain from that universe. You have to fight your way through the henchmen and overcome any obstacles they throw at you in order to retrieve it. I know this makes it seem like all of the levels are very similar, but this couldn't be further from the truth. The developer was able to strike a good balance between making the dimensions feel different from one another, while ensuring that nothing feels too out of place. I hope you enjoyed the levels, as in some cases you'll spend up to 35 minutes in a single stage. While the main goal of each level is to beat the villain and retrieve the fragment, you also have smaller objectives to complete along the way, like rescuing civilians, defending objectives, and swinging away from impending death.
Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Bum, 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 bum.
Each Spider-Man has their own unique abilities and style, which I'll talk about in more detail later, but they all know how to throw hands. You fight enemies using basic combinations of light and heavy attacks, and your moveset can be upgraded using the Web of Destiny. You complete the Web of Destiny by completing challenges specific to each level, such as completing sections under a time limit, defeating enemies a certain way, and collecting spider emblems and hidden spiders scattered throughout the levels. After you complete a certain number of challenges from the Web of Destiny, you're able to purchase rewards such as expanded health and ability meters, new combos, and of course, bonus suits. While they're nowhere near as good as the Insomniac Spider-Man bonus suits, they're definitely better than the Avengers ones. The game plays really well for the most part, and even though this is one of my personal favourite games from my childhood, I'm not blind to the cracks that have formed over the years. For one, the lock-on system is terrible. When you're faced with a large number of enemies, it can be difficult to lock onto the person or object you want to, and sometimes you find yourself fighting gangsters from the 1920s and the game's camera at the same time. And while I thought that insufferable hints were a recent trope in video games, it turns out that Madam Web just won't shut up when you're fighting a boss. And sometimes the game just doesn't let you progress through levels straight away. In one level I was just stuck walking around a room waiting for something to happen to let me move on, and it took a few more minutes than it should have. I played Shattered Dimensions on PS3, and honestly my experience seemed buggier than it was on Xbox 360 when I played the game for the first time. Moving on from the basic mechanics and structure, let's dive deeper into the dimensions that have been shattered and the Spider-Man that need to unshatter them. The Spider-Man to kick off the events of the game is Peter Parker from the Amazing Dimension. Voiced by Neil Patrick Harris, this is pretty much your garden variety Spider-Man.
That's so romantic, I want to fill a pillowcase with dead batteries and beat you with it.
If this dimension was a flavour, it would be original. But that's not to say that this dimension is boring. I'm just saying that this dimension is the baseline for Spider-Man. If anything, this helps emphasise how unique each universe is from the rest. The Amazing Dimension uses cell shading to imitate the aesthetic of old comic books, and this is most prominent with the design of Spider-Man himself. He has the quips you'd expect.
Another boy band? Are you guys gonna sing for me?
Aw, we're not going into the spooky old mine, are we? Will we have to solve a mystery and unmask someone dressed as a ghost too? If so, my money's on old man Jenkins.
I'll destroy you!
And he doesn't take himself too seriously. He uses webs in combat to hit enemies with boulders and huge web constructs. At one point you can unlock a giant web mace. I know Spider-Man doesn't kill, but that seems pretty lethal. These levels see you travel through the jungle to take on Kraven the Hunter, chase Sandman through a quarry, and follow Juggernaut on his rampage throughout New York. During some boss fights you're able to get in the villain's face for a good old fashioned bout of fisticuffs. One thing these sections did is make me realise how terrible a first person Spider-Man game would be. I just constantly get motion sick, I wouldn't be able to complete the game without a bucket nearby. I didn't really have any issues with the levels in this dimension. I found the voice of Neil Patrick Harris a bit distracting at times, but that's just because I've been watching How I Met Your Mother on repeat for the last 5 years. For the next Spider-Man, we travel back to the 1920s. Spider-Man Noir is Peter Parker from 1920s New York, and he got his powers from an ancient spider god or something. Feel free to argue about this in the comics, I'm just going by the bio that the game gives you. This Peter is voiced by Christopher Daniel Barnes, who you might recognise from the 90s animated show.
Anything.
He isn't voiced by Nicolas Cage like he is in the 2018 movie, because Cage was associated with another Marvel hero when this game released. For better and for worse, Spider-Man Noir has the most unique playstyle out of all 4 wall crawlers present here. The levels in this world have a much darker colour palette and focus almost entirely on stealth. You make your way through New York, quietly taking down members of Norman Osborn's gang and saving civilians that they've taken hostage. The level designs and enemy types are the most consistent here out of all the dimensions. You only ever fight against 1920s gangsters. But the stealth hasn't aged very well in my opinion. I know some people will say that the game came out in 2010, so of course it's aged, but Batman Arkham Asylum came out the year before this, and the gameplay is so much more polished. And there's this one section in the Goblin level where you have to choose the right clown door, but there's just no indication as to which one's the right one. The entire Goblin level is just kinda awful. But yeah, if you hadn't guessed by now, the fragments have been picked up by the members of Goblin's gang. You take on Hammerhead and Vulture, who apparently killed and ate Uncle Ben in this dimension. Huh. And then you finally fight Goblin himself.
I'm telling you, Mr. Osborn, the Spider-Man is coming.
Do you take me for a fool?
What?
I want him to come.
Either way, I think the Noir dimension has some cool ideas, but it hasn't aged as well as the other dimensions. On the opposite end of the timeline, we have Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man of the year 2099.
You're not Peter Parker.
He's voiced by Dan Gilvezan, who also played parts such as Bumblebee in a lot of Transformers games and series, as well as Security Guard from the Spider-Man movie video game. This dimension returns to the classic action beat-em-up styles of the other levels. Miguel has to fight his way through Alchemax and their experiments to secure all of his fragments. The enemies you fight in these levels include the Public Eye Patrol, Experimental Chimeras, the Scorpion of the Future, and some original creations for Shattered Dimensions, Hobgoblin and Doc Ock 2099.
Impressive, isn't it? What do you mean, meh?
I've seen one of these before.
No, you haven't.
Unlike his Peter Parker counterpart, Miguel has the ability to slow down his perception of time using accelerated vision. This makes it much easier for Miguel to avoid missiles during combat and obstacles during his exclusive free-falling sections. I don't have many issues with these levels. I expected them all to feel the exact same as you're always going through Alchemax facilities, but the devs found ways to keep them all distinct. The first level is your average Alchemax setup, but the following level sees a compound ruined by Scorpion's nest and his acid. And the final level has you going through the top secret labs where the last 2 villains were created. The only thing I found a bit annoying was how bright the levels are. I get that it's the future, but the neon lights start to hurt my eyes after a while, and so much so that I had to turn the brightness down. But apart from that, these levels were pretty fun and I can't wait to see Miguel in Across the Spider-Verse. And finally we have the Ultimate Spider-Man. No, not that one. A good one. Peter Parker in this dimension makes use of the black suit, which means that isn't in the game. This dimension feels somewhat similar to the Amazing Dimension, as this one also uses a cel-shaded art style. However, this one takes heavy inspiration from comic books from the early 2000s. This Peter is voiced by Josh Keaton, who you may recognise as the Spider-Man with the best opening theme song by far. In this dimension you fight against Electro, Deadpool and Carnage. Something I found really funny in the Deadpool level is that all the henchmen you fight are just Deadpool fanboys decked out head to toe in merch.
Hey, man. Love your outfit.
Back at ya! You get yours in the fan club catalog too?
Nah, the gift shop. You know, if you get it in person, they actually tailor it for you.
No way! Right there in the shop?
Yeah, I mean, they take your measurements there in the shop. But doing the actual tailoring takes a couple days, but it's so worth it.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I mean, right?
Dude, turn around. Let me look at how it fits you. Yeah, I gotta say that is really nice.
I'm telling you, man, tailored.
I think this level in particular plays into the absurdity of Deadpool quite well, as you spend the entire level smashing cameras because you've been forced to guest star on his sadistic killer TV show.
Ta-da! Live and in person, the one, the only, Deadpool! Oh, look at you. What about me? Nah, I thought you'd be taller. Oh well, we just won't use a lot of wide lenses.
This Spider-Man reminds me of myself when I see Geese in the local park, as he's a bit of a brawler. The levels in this dimension see you take on hordes of enemies, and as such your attacks have a wider area of effect. When you're fully surrounded, you can turn the tables by entering Rage mode. Here, Peter lets the Venom symbiote go wild. You get a massive power boost, your attacks have a wider area of effect, and bigger tentacles? Honestly, I don't have any criticism for these levels. They were my favourite out of the bunch. The Carnage level has this apocalyptic horror feel to it, and the variety is much appreciated. Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions was the first game I played when I got my original Xbox 360, and as a kid I thought this shit was on another level. It was my comfort game, and honestly, nowadays I think I could play the Kraven level blindfolded. Unfortunately, nostalgia doesn't always cover all the cracks, unless I'm playing Pokemon or watching Dragon Ball. I still think the game's good, but it's definitely been outshined by other superhero games both before and after its initial release in 2010. The poorly aged stealth segments, the lock-on system that actively makes combat worse, and the technical issues detract from what makes the game so cool in the first place. But I have to say that the diversity in the design of the levels and dimensions, the pretty fun combat, and the Spider-Men themselves do somewhat make up for the shortcomings. 7 out of 10. Still good, but the cracks have become more noticeable.